Hello and welcome to Teaching Citizenship in Person and Online. So I'm going to share strategies for both in person and online. So it is a lot of information, but you'll have all these slides to access and opportunities to ask questions today too. I love teaching citizenship because I really get to know the life stories of the students. A lot of the interview is telling their history, talking about their family and their experiences. And then it is super exciting to watch them achieve their goal and become citizens and have gain the right to vote, as well as possibly bring other family members here.
TV if you want.
And so I am excited to be here tonight to share about teaching citizenship. A little bit about me. I studied second languages and cultures at the University of Minnesota. I've taught ESL for 8 years. I started with high school students and then switched to teaching adults. So I've actually taught citizenship longer than ESL. So I have young kids, so I took a break from ESL and just continued with citizenship. I started at Literacy Minnesota in 2010, and I've taught citizenship in person and online in Minneapolis since 2011. And currently, I teach an online citizenship class on Wednesdays from 2:30 to 6. So I have students from around the Twin Cities, and any of you would be welcome to come and observe the class if you would like, since it's on Zoom and you can join from anywhere. I know we have people from all over the country. And then I also teach intermediate ESL to adults 4 mornings a week. So that's a little bit about my background. And the objectives for today are to provide a framework and ideas for teaching the different parts of the citizenship interview. So I'll talk a lot about how I structure my class and how I make sure to teach all the different parts of the interview in a lesson. And then to equip teachers and volunteers with a variety of teaching strategies that actively engage students. So I've taught citizenship for a long time, and now I have a bunch of activities and I can tailor them to students of different English levels. So my class is students from beginning ESL up to advanced. And so I'll talk about how I differentiate for different levels. And then to make teachers and volunteers aware of resources related to citizenship. And so I'll share some websites that I use and a website that I created as well when we first went online during COVID. So Megan's going to send out a quick poll, just kind of curious about who is here at the training and how many years of experience you may have with citizenship. So Megan will launch that poll and then we'll be able to see your answer.
All right, the poll has been launched. It's just 2 questions. So just make sure you scroll down in the box so that you can see both questions and then click on submit. We are, you all are on the ball because we are at nearly 90% have already participated. So glad to know you are focused on the session.
So we have a lot of volunteers and a lot of teachers, but even more volunteers than teachers. And majority are 0 to 2 years, so newer to the process of teaching citizenship. So I will start from the beginning to talk about the process. So this might be a review for some of you and might be new information for others. So the first thing to know is that there is eligibility regarding when someone can apply for citizenship. And a person needs to be a permanent resident for 5 years to apply for citizenship, unless they are married to a U.S. citizen. For a U.S. citizen, it's 3 years. And that is talking about the date on their green card or their permanent resident card. So they need to, so right away with my students, I always ask, okay, when did you become a permanent resident, to find out how close they are to being eligible to apply. And the first thing that they do is send in an N-400 application. So this is a 20-page document that you can get at, I will talk a lot about USCIS. That's United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. And so students can find this document and fill it out online You can still print it out and fill it out on paper as well. As a teacher, I do not help students fill out the application because I am not a lawyer, but my goal is to help them understand the application and the vocabulary. It's a very difficult vocabulary. It's vocabulary they will not often learn in their English classes. And so a lot of the class is instruction on what this vocabulary means. If a student comes to you and has not applied, you want to encourage them to keep a copy of their application, because the interview is mostly a conversation about this application. So the immigration officer looks at the application and asks them questions from their application. So it's helpful for them to practice talking if anything has changed since they filled out their application. So you want to remind students to keep a copy of that. And again, it's completely a person's choice to send in the N-400 application. You can stay a permanent resident as long as you'd like. I've had students, a lot of my students, they hit the 5-year mark and they apply. I've had students who have been permanent residents for 30 years and then decided to apply. Then they'll have what's called biometrics or a fingerprint appointment, and then they'll receive their interview date. And that has varied greatly in my years of teaching. Sometimes the shortest is about 3 months. Used to send in an application, have fingerprints, and an interview in 3 months. During COVID, it was up to 2 years. In Minneapolis now, it's back down to about 6 to 8 months. And that's very helpful because if you have a student whose English is very high, you can encourage them to apply right away. If the time is only 3 months or 4 months, then you might say, no, wait to apply. Let's study some more English before you apply. And now a lot of students can create an account on USCIS, but there's also this website where you can check your case status online. So this is updated earlier than, they still will receive everything in the mail. But for my students, we can look at their receipt number, which you find, they get letters from USCIS after they apply, and they'll have a receipt number on there. You can type that in and we'll tell you earlier if you have an interview scheduled before it arrives in the mail. So it's just a way to look at updates on your case status. But I'd encourage students, if they're tech able, to log in or sign up and make an account on USCIS. So now the citizenship interview. It often starts with small talk. It doesn't always, but I tell students, this is where the immigration officer is trying to see if you understand English, if you can have a conversation about traffic, about the weather. And so we practice that in class, and then they're put under oath. So it's very important that they understand that they are promising to tell the truth. So we practice this a lot in class, and I tell them the US government knows everything about you. So the most important thing is to tell the truth at your interview. So after they take the oath, the official interview begins, and they simply answer yes to the oath question. Then they will start going through the N-400 application. So they will just go through, what is your current legal name? What is your date of birth? When did you become a lawful permanent resident? And so I'll show you how I teach all these different parts of the interview. After that are the 44 yes/no questions, sometimes called the moral character questions. And here is where students will encounter a lot of difficult vocabulary. Have you ever claimed to be a US citizen? Now, all they do is answer yes or no. They don't need to explain no and give an answer. They just say no. If they answer yes to any of these questions, then I recommend that they see a lawyer. Because if they answer yes, then they need to be able to explain the circumstances and what happened. And then there are 6 citizenship oath questions, and these are about the promises that they make when they become a US citizen. So, do you support the Constitution and form of government of the United States? The person needs to say yes. Now, for the question about if the law requires it, are you willing to bear arms on behalf of the United States? Students can answer no if they have a religious reason that they can explain at their interview. And so I recommend to students that they send in documents from their faith community that says that they are committed to nonviolence. So send it in with their application and then be able to talk about it at their interview. I did have a student this year who, to this question, she said, no, because I'm a woman. And they said, can you explain that? And she said, well, I'm a woman. And she got confused about the selective service, where it's men 18 to 26. So she did not pass. She failed her interview because being a woman is not a reason why you decide not to bear arms. It has to be because of a religious reason, and you have to have documents to show why you will not promise to bear arms on behalf of the United States. Then there's the civics question. So this is the part of the interview most students know about. Most students can pass because they watch videos and they practice. And so these are there's 100 questions total, and they are about history, government, geography, and they will get 10 random questions and they need to get 6 correct. Then they need to read one sentence correctly, and it's actually a question. All of these are questions, and USCIS has a list of all the words they need to be able to read on their website. So a teacher put together all of these questions, and this is often, for most of my students, they're okay with the reading, but we still practice it in class. And they get 3 chances. So if they look at this and they say, how was the family president? Okay, they read it wrong. They're going to give them another question. Where does Congress meet? Okay, if they can read that one, they pass. If not, they'll give them a 3rd question. If they can't read any of the 3, then they do not pass the reading. And it's the same for the writing. And again, we know the words they need to study, and so we practice and practice every week. So they'll tell them, please write, Washington was the first president. And for, at least in Minneapolis, a lot of the times they need to write on a tablet. And so we practice that in class. They can use their finger or they can use a pen, and so that they feel a little more familiar with that. Again, if they spell this incorrectly, they'll give them another sentence. So they have up to 3 chances. In my years of teaching, writing is the part of the interview that the most of the students have failed. So out of all the sections, writing is the one where students have not passed. And I'll explain what happens there. So at the end of their interview, thankfully that day, they find out if they passed. So they get this form, and on the form, sorry, it's a little blurry, it's a picture from a student. It says you passed the English and US history and government test. So that means they passed the conversation about the N400, and they passed the civics questions and the reading and writing. If they did not pass, it says you will have another opportunity to be tested on your ability to speak, read, write, or understand English. So if they do not pass, the immigration officer will check, okay? If they do not pass writing, they will tell them that day, and then they will have another opportunity. So there's a possibility of 2 interviews. So if a student doesn't pass their first interview, they will be scheduled for a second interview in a couple months, and they will be tested only on the parts of the interview they didn't pass the first time. So if a student didn't pass writing, they will still be put under oath. They might still need to answer some basic information questions, name, address, those questions, but they should not be asked to do the 100 civics questions again if they already passed that. So that is nice that they can just focus on the part of the interview that they didn't pass before their second interview. Now, if they don't pass 2 times, then they have to start over at the beginning and send an N400 application again. And I just want to briefly mention that there are fee waivers for the application. So I think the application is around $800, and there is a full fee waiver and there is a partial fee waiver. So on USCIS, you can find the family size and the income and see if your students are eligible for a fee waiver, a full fee waiver, or partial. And an important phrase for any teacher or volunteer is, I'm not a lawyer. Because with citizenship, there's a lot of legal questions. There's questions about this happened in my history. Will I be okay at my interview? And I just say, I am not a lawyer. I want to help you with understanding the vocabulary for your interview, the history and the government, but I refer students to a lawyer if they have any kind of legal issues, problems with the police, any kind of questions that come up when we're doing those yes/no questions. So it's a very important phrase so that you're not put in a position where you're trying to give advice about something that you're not an expert in. And so I'm lucky enough, we work with the Immigrant Law Center in St. Paul, and they will help my students apply for citizenship and sometimes also go with them to the interview. So now I'll get into how I teach the different parts. So we'll start with conversation practice, and I will pause in a little bit to see if there's any questions from the chat. So I'll go through conversation practice and then pause for a minute. So first we start with small talk, and I have a poster in my classroom, or I have a PowerPoint slide that I show students all the time to teach them those interview skills. Can you repeat the question, please? So I say, do not just smile and nod if you don't know what they said. So we practice this in class when they need me to repeat something. So this is just an interview skill to keep asking students to use while they're practicing in class. So in person, I typed up different questions that I've heard from lawyers that they might ask when a student arrives at their interview. So some of them, how's the weather? How is traffic today? How did you get here today? Students will say, I'm good, because you don't ask people, how did you get here? Often we don't ask people, how did you get here to class? And so I have pictures, which I'll show you how I explain these different small talk questions. And I just say right away, the immigration officer wants to know if you understand English. So let's practice this small talk so you can use vocabulary more than just saying good. So teaching them some other vocabulary to describe the weather. So what I'll do is call on different students to answer these questions in class. Then I give the students the cut up paper and they mingle around the room asking and answering the questions. So I want to try to get them talking as much as possible because the interview is a conversation. And I also want them to listen to accents that don't sound like me, because the immigration officer might have an accent. And so to have them practice listening to English from a variety of speakers. So then they switch the question and then they move around and talk to someone else in the class. So they practice those questions with each other, ask and answer, and then switch and talk with someone else. It's also just good to get them up and moving in the classroom, keep them engaged. And then I have these slides that I use either in person or online. So how's the weather today? Just trying to give them more vocabulary than it's good. Because if you can say it's sunny or you can say it's cloudy, you're showing that you know more English vocabulary. How's traffic today? And then I always use pictures because, like I said, I have beginning level ESL students. And so they might need pictures to help them understand these questions. So teaching them it's very bad, or for higher level students, it's very heavy. We talk about traffic as being heavy, or we talk about traffic as being light. So sometimes I'll give a couple different examples for students of different levels to use to answer that question. How did you get here today? So I drove my car. My husband drove me. My sister drove me. Now, of course, if they say I drive, that's totally fine. But I just say we're going to practice in the past tense because it's how did you get here? I drove my car, or I took the bus, or I rode my bike. So again, we practice these every class when they come in, and just other questions, other kind of small talk questions to just get them to work on communicating in English. Did it take you long to get here today? So teaching them some phrases. No, only 15 minutes. Or yes, it took 45 minutes because of traffic. So again, they don't have to be full sentence answers, but just giving them some kind of sentence frames to use to practice these questions over and over. Then I'll move on to the personal information questions from the N400. So again, here asking them to practice, can you explain the question, please? So if you don't understand something, ask them to explain it. And the immigration officer's job is to try to use simple English to explain. So their job is to try to communicate with this person if possible. So I encourage students to ask them to explain the questions. I start with teaching just some of these words they will see on their application. Legal. When you ask someone, what is your current legal name? They look at you and they have no idea what you just asked them because they don't know legal and they don't know current. And I say the application has a lot of really formal, really official English. And so let's talk about what these words mean. So legal means the law, the rules. Current means now. Prior means before. And I have other review activities where they practice this vocabulary that they can do at home on their phone or on their computers. Spouse. A lot of students don't know spouse. So spouse is husband or wife. So I teach these words, and then we use them in questions. So these are some of the questions they'll be asked. What is your country of nationality? How many times have you been married? What is your current legal name? So I explain that my legal name is Jessica Horning. People call me Jess, but Jess is not on my driver's license. Jess is not on my passport. So when it's talking about legal name, it's your official name. So I give students, again, we do a mingle with these questions where they go around the room and ask each other these questions and answer them. A lot of students don't know what lawful permanent resident means because they know this as the green card. And so I just explain that you need to look on your green card and look for where it says resident since. And then you will have the date of when you became a permanent resident. And there's different versions of the permanent resident card. So I just show them visuals so they are able to answer that question. Other questions, again, I'm just giving you a few of the questions and how I teach it. There's a lot more questions that they'll need to practice. Do you work? Where do you work? And often students want to say, oh, I work in Minneapolis. But when we ask, where do you work? We actually want to know what the company name is. So I work at Target, I work at Best Buy, whatever the answer is. How long have you worked there? So these are questions they'll be asked at their interview. So teaching them for 2 years or since December 2020. So always trying to give them some examples. What is your current marital status? Well, in everyday conversation, no one asks you your current marital status. They ask, are you married? Are you single? Are you divorced? And so this one, once I show the options, single, oh, okay, now they know what I'm talking about. And so, I explain that status is like different categories. And so your current marital status, and it's also important for students to know single means never married. So sometimes when people are divorced, they want to say they are single, but single is that they are never married. So once you show them that, and then you just keep practicing, then students, then they can answer that question easily about their current marital status. Now, again, they can say, can you explain the question, please? And the immigration officer should say, are you single or are you married or are you divorced? So they should use other English. But again, I'm trying to teach them what they might hear at their interview and how to answer it. Where does your spouse work? Well, to know this question, you need to know that spouse means husband or wife. So just kind of reviewing that and then giving sentence examples, or he or she doesn't work. And then here are a couple ways that I practice these. Again, after kind of giving instruction, So let me show you. So WordWall is a great website that a coworker found when we started online in 2020, and I highly recommend it. And you'll use WordWall today to see some activities that I've created. And there is a subscription for it, but it's just been a really great way to make interactive activities for students. And so here is a conversation wheel that I made. And you type in the questions, and then I'll have a student read it to another student, and then the student will answer. And just another way to practice the vocabulary and the questions without just me asking and them answering. So a student would read this, the other student would answer, and then I can eliminate the question and spin the wheel again. So these are small talk and personal information questions. When did you become a permanent resident? So students enjoy using these in class. And then there's a free one that's called Wheel of Names. And so I think this was originally made to put your students' names on here and spin and choose a student to answer a question. But you can use it. Here I typed up some questions from the N400 application. Now this is a free website, so there will be advertisements, but it works very similarly where you just spin the wheel and then the question will come up, and then you can either read the question to students or have them read them to each other. So it's nice, it does come up bigger because you can't really read them on the circle, but you could use this in a variety of ways by making different wheels with different questions. Oh, what is your country of nationality? Then remove it and then spin for another question. And those are linked in the PowerPoint, so you'll have access to those. And then I just wanted to pause because I know it's a lot of information and see if there's any questions from the Google Doc that Megan wants me to talk about.
Yes. Excuse me. Let me take a look at that. So, Jessica, it's probably easier if you just look at it yourself than if I read them to you. So I'm going to put that link in the chat for everybody right now. So so just can see the questions, but then you can also add any questions as well. I know that I think Jessica's going to actually get to some of the questions. So
should I keep going for now?
No, I think this is a good time to pause and take a look.
Okay, because I haven't looked at it at all.
Yeah.
Were there any themes that stood out to you?
Not really.
Okay.
I think the first question is from Greg Olson, and I'm going to respond to him directly. Second question has been addressed. I would look first at question 3.
Okay.
So have you seen the new changes to the new the new civics portion of the test?
I have not seen those. Is that recent? Because I know there was the 2020 version. Have they talked about another version coming out? Because the 2020 version was launched and then the Biden administration rescinded it and we went back to the 2008 version. So you still see it sometimes on the website, but I haven't heard of any of new questions coming out.
They're doing a new form, a new way of administering the test, and they're testing it now.
Okay. Like a completely new interview?
So the way they want to do the civics questions is by multiple choice reading and answering multiple choice questions instead of doing it verbally. So they're doing a rollout right now to test the format they want to use.
Okay.
And they also want to show pictures for the listening and speaking and have them describe a picture.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So have you seen these on USCIS? Have you seen?
They're trying to get test groups to test their new questions right now. And so they probably won't do it and But I would imagine probably until next year.
Okay. Yeah, I have not looked into that at all. So someone asked about conversation practice in an online class. And so what I do is do those word wall, the conversation wheels, and just have, you can see the students on the right side. And so then I would just say, okay, Yusuf, you ask Ketmani this question. And then Ketmani, you ask Fardosa this question. But then I also put them in breakout rooms, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. So I do, because it is hard and online to have them talk. It's much easier in person. So I do make some partner interviews and have them do those in breakout rooms, which I think our students really like that because it's an opportunity to ask and answer questions with a classmate. Yep, I'll share materials. The word wall games are public that I'll send to you. Again, they're Minnesota based, so some of them you won't want to use, like the Congress one because of our senators and representatives, but the history ones will be easy because it's general. It doesn't change depending on where you live. Let's see. So I think because of time, I'm just going to keep going, and then maybe during break I can look and see. So, because I'll answer some of these questions as I keep going through the training. I saw there's a question about exceptions, and I would have to look at USCIS about that, but there are rules, like if you've been here for more than 20 years and you're over 55, then you have a different set of questions. But I don't want to, I don't ever have those students in my class, so I'm not as familiar with them, but I can try to look that up and share maybe after the break. Is that okay, Megan, if I keep going?
Absolutely.
Okay. So now I'll talk about the 100 civics questions and how my class is organized. So we based it on Citizenship Passing the Test, which is by Lynn Weintraub, and I will talk about her more. She is the teacher who put together the list of the reading questions and the writing sentences. And so this is a great book that you can use with lower level students. It's minimal text and a lot of pictures. And so it's a great resource. So we use this to organize our class. So we get a grant from USCIS. We work with the Immigrant Law Center to provide classes, and they want us to cover our curriculum in 3 months. And so that's why it's 12 weeks. Now I have students who stay with me for 1 year, a year and a half. I have other students who are with me for 2 weeks because they have an interview date, and I have them work with a volunteer. So, I'm very flexible with having, students. Some students are repeating the curriculum and other students are just coming to practice the interview. So I start with the Constitution. I do not go 1 to 10, 11 to 20. I go by topic. So I take questions about the Constitution and make a lesson, then about the executive branch, legislative branch, then judicial branch, and government review. So I always tell students, we will study, 8 to 10 questions a week, and then we'll review them next week, and then we'll add more on, and we'll review, and we'll keep adding more on. So I'll show you how I review and then teach new civics questions. Then we have rights and responsibilities, and talking about the naturalization ceremony and the oath questions. And again, in every lesson, we're also doing small talk, reading and writing, and conversation. Then getting to know you, there's questions about the symbols, the flag, the national anthem, leaders, politicians. Then we have a week on geography. And then we start the history questions. So colonial times and independence, the early United States, so about the history of the Constitution, where this part is more about how many amendments are there, those type of questions. Slavery and the Civil War, later history, which is like the 1900s, World War I, World War II, and then history review. And again, students stay with me, so we cycle through things, and I never teach the same lesson exactly the same because it depends on who is in my room and what they need. So for some students, they need more literacy skills, so we focus on that. For some students, they need more conversation skills. For many students, they know the history and government questions, but I also tell them, I really want you to understand these concepts because you'll live in the US and you'll vote, and I want you to really understand our government and not just memorize the answers. So I try to give them more information, but also be very explicit about this is what you need to know for your citizenship interview. The Smithsonian website is a great tool that's free, and on it you can go in by topic again, and there's nice, I'll show you an example. There's really nice videos with a lot of historical pictures and sometimes like a real life example so that students understand the topic. And there are also quizzes where you take 10, listen to 10 questions. It's multiple choice because that's the only way to do it. But it's nice because it gives students kind of practice tests of 10 civics questions, and then they answer them on the website and it will tell them how many they got correct. So I'm going to show you a short little video from the Smithsonian website on the Supreme Court. And the sound does not work very well when I'm sharing it. So I'm going to turn on the closed caption. And so for all the 100 questions, there's a short little video. And I'm going to mute because the sound is not very good, and then put on the closed captions for you.
What is the highest court in the United States?
Jessica, we're not seeing the video, we're seeing your PowerPoint.
Is the highest court of the United States.
Okay.
The Supreme Court decides if a law goes against.
Okay, how about now?
Yes,
Okay, perfect. Thanks for telling me.
sure.
Against the Constitution.
Here, let me start it over.
What is the highest court in the United States? The Supreme Court is the highest court of the United States. The Supreme Court decides if a law goes against the Constitution. All other courts must follow the decisions of the Supreme Court. One example is the case of Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas in 1954. The case was about racial segregation in schools. Segregation was a system that separated people based on race and ethnic group. The Supreme Court decided that segregation in schools was against the Constitution. All states had to follow the Supreme Court decision. Segregation in school became illegal in the United States. The Supreme Court is the highest court of the United States. What is the highest court in the United States?
So I like that because it gives students, well, it has nice visuals, and then it also gives students a real case to understand the Supreme Court. So I think the court system is very confusing to a lot of students. They don't really understand. But to talk about segregation in schools, that also brings in the civil rights movement, which is part of the interview, and important US history to know about. And so understanding that the decision that they made about that school in Kansas, now all the schools in the United States needed to integrate. So I really like how it gives like a real case example that students can understand, that show how the Supreme Court decisions affect the whole country. So they have those for all the 100 questions. And so I just pick and choose to use some of them, or you can share with students to watch it at home, to look at the website at home. So I'll just talk about some of my strategies here. So the USCIS gives multiple answers that are acceptable, but I don't choose one or two because some of the questions ask for two. I choose one of the acceptable answers to teach, then I use that same answer when I teach, practice, and review. So to show you an example, here is what USCIS has on their website. So what does the Constitution do? They have 3 answers. What is one right or freedom from the First Amendment? They have 5 answers. So we took these questions and made a simple document with just one answer that we will use in class and on any review materials. And so I think that really helps students because they don't need to memorize all 3. They only need to memorize one acceptable answer. So I'm going to show you my Congress lesson and show first how I review the executive branch. And again, my class is all levels of ESL, so I tend to start very simple, just question, picture, and answer. And then I'll show you for higher level students some of the materials I give them. So you can buy these flashcards from USCIS, or you can make them yourself with just the question and the answer. So again, give students cards, have them mingle around the room and talk with each other. And then I have slides with just the question and the answer. What is the name of the president now? Okay, with a so this is just, I would ask a student, okay, I'd read the question to the student and then just ask different students to answer it. So again, this is review. What does the president's cabinet do? And then show a picture of the cabinet and talk about some of the people in the cabinet. So Kamala Harris is in the cabinet. Antony Blinken is the Secretary of State. But again, you just need to know what they do. And then so here's one where you need 2 answers. And I teach them 2 secretaries because I think that's easier than vice president and Secretary of State. But again, students will memorize Secretary of Education or other answers. And so I try to teach them, okay, if you hear cabinet level positions, you think Secretary of State, Secretary of Labor. Make sure it's something you can say. They try to say Secretary of Agriculture, and that's really hard to say. So choose ones that are easier, state or labor. So we just go through those. Again, in person, they would be talking more and mingling around the room. And then the new civics questions. USCIS has free lessons that you can download online, and they have beginning level and intermediate level. So you can see here for the beginning level, they're going to have more pictures and less text. So this is the materials on Congress. So then here's the information they have about the Senate. And then here's the intermediate level. So in the intermediate level, it will talk about how a bill becomes a law. There are no questions on the interview about how a bill becomes a law, but for higher level students, they might have the vocabulary to be able to read that and understand. So just so you can see, there's a lot more information in the intermediate level texts, and also teaches them requirements for US senators and information. Again, I always am explicit about, you don't need to know this for your interview, but this you do need to know. And then these are the USCIS questions about Congress. So you can do that in person or online. I can just show these and have students read different paragraphs, and then we talk about the vocabulary. Or some higher level students, I'll send them a link to this reading, have them work on it in a breakout room with a partner, and then come back and discuss it with me, or if they have any questions about the vocabulary. So I'll go through this pretty quickly just to show you how I use visuals to explain the information, and use charts. So talking about the 3 branches of government, and we will mostly use Congress. We don't even really need to use legislative branch because most of the questions ask about Congress. Who is in charge of the executive branch? That's the president. Judicial branch is the courts. So using diagrams to help them understand, what does it mean when we say the Constitution sets up the government? This is a visual that shows how the Constitution sets up the government. And then I would just ask students who have been in my class for a while, okay, who makes federal laws? They say Congress, and you can see it. Who signs bills to become laws? Who vetoes bills? And then what does the judicial branch do? So after teaching for a while, you'll start to memorize all these questions and know which part of the question they're asking. Because for judicial branch, they ask, what does the judicial branch do? And that's explains laws. And so I use these visuals as ways to explain separation of powers and explain, see, the Congress makes laws, then the president signs them, and then the courts explain laws. So I'll use the Affordable Health Care Act to kind of explain how that bill became a law, and then it went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decided that it does follow the Constitution. And then another diagram is about the people and the buildings, so people understand that the president lives in the White House, Congress is in the Capitol building, and then the people that they need to know. So this is in the Congress lesson. They need to know these people, 3 of them from Minnesota. So obviously, if you're teaching in Colorado, you're going to be using different pictures and different information. So just going through again, these using the pictures to explain that the Senate is the group, the senators are the people. So sometimes trying to help them understand the difference between some of these vocabulary words. And then I teach them both senators, even though they only need to know one. I encourage them to say Tina Smith. It's easier than Amy Klobuchar. But since there's only 2, I want them to know who both of their senators are. And then talking about a map. So if you live in St. Cloud, if you live in Duluth, if you live in Minneapolis, you have the same senator represents you. They represent all people of the state. And then talking about what is the difference between a representative and a senator. A lot of people, a lot of US born people might not really be able to explain that. So we look at this map, and this also helps to talk about how important the US Census is, because this is after the 2020 census, and because of the population, some of the states either lost or gained representatives. So I talk about, okay, here's Minnesota. We have 8 representatives. What do you know about the population between Minnesota and Wisconsin? Pretty similar, right? Because we have the same. What do we know about North Dakota? They don't have many, students will say, oh, they don't have a lot of people. What do we know about California? Okay, California has a lot of people. California has the most people, so they have the most representatives. So I think it's just good, map reading skills for some students. They won't know what this is a map of. So talking about it's a map of the 50 states, and then talking about that, then it depends on the population. The population decides how many representatives, and that it changes after the Senate. After the census. And then I show Minnesota specific information. So we have 8 districts. I just do a lot of prompt questions. So like, what do we know about this area here in Minneapolis? Okay, how can these have the same, this has 1 representative and this has 1 representative? What do we know about here? Oh, there's a lot of people there. So they take the state and they break it up into districts based on population. So over here, there's not as many people as there are here in Minneapolis. And then talking about District 5, because that's where our class is based in Minneapolis. And so showing them the map of the district. So for some students, their US representative is Ilhan Omar. For other people, if you live in St. Paul, it's Betty McCollum. So I explain when I have something that I want to talk to my representatives about, I call Tina Smith, Amy Klobuchar, and I live in Minneapolis, so I call Ilhan Omar. But if you live in St. Paul, you call Tina Smith, Amy Klobuchar, and you call Betty McCollum. If I call Betty McCollum and tell her I live in Minneapolis, she will say, sorry, I don't represent you. Please call Ilhan Omar. So just to try to help them understand how, like, what a district is and who their representative is. And then in Minnesota, we have this great website, Who Represents Me. You can put in your address, and then you can also see your state House and state senators. So they don't need to know this for their citizenship interview, but when they have the right to vote, they can use this website also to see who represents them and who might be candidates in an upcoming election. So again, just trying to use, instead of just teaching them the answer, showing them again that we have 52 in California because they have more people than in Minnesota, where we have 8. And then Kevin McCarthy. So some of these obviously need to get updated regularly. The Speaker of the House needs to get updated regularly, and then possibly the representatives, but it just depends on if they get reelected or not. So we are about to go to a breakout room. I'm going to show you a couple word wall activities. So this is one that I made about Congress. Now, again, this you won't want to use unless you live in the Twin Cities in Minnesota, because these will be unfamiliar names to your students. But I do these in class, and then I can text them out to my students. So I use a program called Remind, and I can send them a text message. I can send them activities. You could use WhatsApp, you can use email. And so you can do it in class, but then you can also make it so they have to fill in their name, and then they fill in the answers and then submit it, and then I can see. So it would just be talking about, okay, 6 years, that goes in the Senate. So you just move these squares into the right place in the Senate and House. So to help students kind of differentiate between the 2 branches of government, then you submit your answers and it will show you how you did. And then you can also have it show you the answers. So if you didn't know, it will show the answers to you. So in our breakout room, Megan will send this link in a minute. And this is a citizenship website that I made in 2020, and I've updated it a little bit. But again, some of these things, mostly it's Congress that is Minnesota specific. Politicians I've already updated. So if you go here to, well, politicians, again, those going to have Minnesota specific information. So you're just matching the governor, the Speaker of the House, you're just matching their names. But another option is historical people. This you can use anywhere in the country. And so you just have your students, you can either read, work on it together in class, or you can send it to them, and then they do this matching activity. So Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves. Susan B. Anthony fought for women's rights. So if you have a touch screen, you can just move the rectangles. Depending on your students' skills, you might have to teach them how to use a mouse to move the information over. So you just match up the historical people. I'll show you one more, and then I'm going to give you time just to look at these activities and see how you may want to use them. Then we have N400 vocabulary. So this is some of that vocabulary I talked about before about the law. So legal means the law. A person who lives in a place is a resident. So again, first I would teach students the vocabulary, and then they move the information, they do the matching activity, and then submit their answers.
All
So
right,
Megan,
are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready. Let me just show everyone what I want them to do. So in your breakout room, one participant shares your screen, And you can look at those word wall activities together, just because then you'll see what is there and talk about how you might use them in your class. You don't need to look at all of them, but just click on a few of those to get a little familiar with word wall. And then talk about other conversation activities you do in class.
Okay, I am sending that link in the chat right now. So best if you click on it now while you're in the main room, because once you go into your breakout room, you won't be able to access the chat. So do click on that link right now. At least one person in your group will have done that, I'm sure. I'm going to put it in the chat one more time. And then I have turned off several cameras just to reduce the distractions. So you may find that you can't turn your camera on when you're in the breakout room. Just apologies for that. But I think you'll be fine just with your mic on. And then I think that is it. I sent that. You guys have the link. You know, one person in your group can share screens. And so I'm going to open up those breakout rooms. Please look for the join button and join as soon as you can, so you have enough time. We're going to be in for about 7 minutes. Joy and Hannah, you should have gotten an invitation to join.
I was actually just going to ask, did you want us to join rooms as well?
Yes, please. I
Okay.
assigned you a room. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So we've got several folks who haven't joined breakout rooms yet. So I invite you to do that. Otherwise, we'll have rooms with like 2 people and they'll be sad. Otherwise, I'm going to move those folks out of those rooms so that they have a decent sized group. I just had a couple people join the main session. I assume you're joining the meeting for the first time. We are in a breakout room right now, and if you'd like to do the activity, I will put the link in the chat for the website that you can check out for the next 4 or 5 minutes or so. Hey, Jessica, I sent you a question in the chat, a private message. All right, we have folks returning from the breakout room. So we'll just give everybody a little time to get back because some folks will still be going. We'll have everybody back in about 20 seconds. Please do turn off your camera as you return. That helps a lot. All right, so we should have everyone back now. So please turn off your camera as you return. This really helps make the session easier for everyone to focus on the presenter and the slides. If you're having trouble doing that, you can send me a chat and I can do it for you. All right, go ahead, Jessica.
All right, I will just share a little bit more about the civics questions and then we'll take a break. So you'll have access to all of these slides. So I'm just going to go through for lower level students. The question words are hard. So who is going to be a person? So just really breaking down these questions to simplify them for students, especially if they are learning English. What? Now, what is very complicated. It's going to be a thing or an idea. When is going to be a date. And so these are some of the answers to the question. So first, it's just helping them understand what these different question words mean. Name. So name is going to be a person. Name your U.S. representative. Name a war. Name a state. So it's just saying to give the name of something. It's not always a person though. Like I said, sometimes it's a state, sometimes it's a war. Why is going to be a because. So because there are 50 states or because they have more people. So I have a PowerPoint this PowerPoint that I use if I have lower level students that really need to just focus on those question words. Then taking those question words and putting them into full civics questions. So who wrote the Declaration of Independence? And then last names are the most important. So they don't need to say Thomas. If they just say Jefferson, they get it correct. If they say Thomas Jefferson, they get it correct. But the most important part is the last name. Who could also be a group. So who lived in America before the Europeans arrived? American Indians. And then I do talk about in my class about who are the indigenous groups to Minnesota. So the Dakota and the Ojibwe or the Anishinaabe. What did the Declaration of Independence do? So some of those words, Constitution, Declaration of Independence, they will hear in several questions. So in those questions, it's so important that they listen for the question word. So I'm just going to go through these quickly because you can access them, but just a strategy for helping lower level students understand the question words and listen for the key vocabulary. Another thing is, again, there's going to be several acceptable answers, but for Abraham Lincoln and the Emancipation Proclamation, the same answer is acceptable. So I don't say saved the Union, was president during the Civil War. I just teach freed the slaves. Also for Emancipation Proclamation, freed the slaves, and explain that emancipate means to free. So ESL teachers, we use our hands a lot to try to explain things. So again, you hear Emancipation Proclamation, you say freed the slaves. And then Susan B. Anthony is the only woman that is asked about at the current interview. And so you hear Susan B. Anthony, you remember Susan is a woman, so she fought for women's rights. So I use a lot of little strategies to help students remember. About senators, we elect a U.S. senator for how many years? 6. Senator 6. You remember that they both start with S. So I just try to give them a lot of different tricks to help them remember the different answers. With pronunciation, focusing on the syllable stress. So president, Washington, Minnesota. I'm sure you're loving my Minnesota accent. So just helping them with the pronunciation of some of those longer words, maybe by talking about the syllable stress. I also bring in current events. And so I'll just show you how I talked about the new Supreme Court justice that was appointed. So reviewing the question about how many justices are on the Supreme Court, and then talking about Stephen Breyer. So I like to bring in real life current events that help students understand our government more, and also understand, well, how is a new Supreme Court justice chosen? It's also a nice way to talk about the 3 branches of government because they're all involved. And so I talk about that he retired and the president chooses someone or nominates someone. The president doesn't get to decide. So first the president chooses someone, then there's a Senate hearing, and Ketanji Brown Jackson had to answer a lot of questions, and that was with the Senate. And then the Senate votes to approve. So as you can see, I use the official language and then in parentheses, simpler English to help students understand. And Jackson was confirmed by a vote of 53 yes and 47 no. So the president nominated, and then the Senate had to approve, and then she became a Supreme Court justice in 2022. So as much as you can to try to make things relevant and things that they might be hearing on the news, to try to explain it in an easier way. I try to bring in current events. Then I do review activities. I've made PowerPoint Jeopardy games. So this one is for history. And so students choose a category and a number, and then they'll get a question and then an answer. In class, I sometimes used to put them in teams and keep track of their score if you want to. So that they enjoy playing this as another way to review. And then the word wall, which you looked at in the breakout rooms. And so again, categorizing what goes in legislative, what goes in executive, what goes in judicial. And then the same with those people from history. In person, I made up a timeline. So I found pictures of important people. And then I tried to write sentences that answered the questions as much as possible. So Lincoln freed the slaves with the Emancipation Proclamation. So it's talking about that freed the slaves goes with both Lincoln and the Emancipation Proclamation. And then we put up the years and the timeline. And then students, I ask questions, and students, I hand out the cards to students. And so I'll say, you know, what happened in July 4th, 1776, and then someone will say the Declaration of Independence was adopted, and then they come up to the board to make this. I think one thing that's important is a lot of students do not understand the time frame between the Civil War and the Civil Rights Movement. And so I think a timeline is a really good way to visualize the amount of time in between different events, and that in the 1600s, the colonists came here, and also the first slaves were brought here. That was part of the beginning of this country. And then it wasn't until 1863 that slaves were freed. So I feel like timelines are really good for visualizing the order of events. And then I have one for the government as well. So hand out the different strips of paper to students, and then ask questions, and the students read their answers and put it in the right place. And then students will come up and take their phone and take a picture. And it's just really helpful because, again, it's getting them up and moving and active and engaged. Yes, no, vocabulary instruction is the most interesting part about teaching citizenship, because you'll teach very difficult vocabulary words. And so it starts on page 11 of the application. And again, there's 44 of these questions. And so what I do is take a set of the questions and we talk about what they mean and the vocabulary. And then the next week we review those and add more on. So that's my strategy, is always, you know, do everything in little chunks and keep working. And I tell students, you don't need to understand every word in these questions. We're going to focus on specific vocabulary to listen for. So I'll just show you how I teach that in person and online. Again, having them ask, can you explain the question, please? And so they should feel comfortable to ask them to explain if they don't understand a question, instead of answering and getting it wrong and not knowing what they're being asked. So someone had asked about this. This was a rule that USCIS shared at a training a couple of years ago. I checked with a lawyer at the Immigrant Law Center, and she said, yes, the USCIS officers cannot ask students the meaning of any of the vocabulary words at their interview. If they do, ask for a supervisor. She did say sometimes they'll ask questions like, how did you get here today? Or how was traffic? They'll ask questions like that to see if the person can understand basic English, but they are not supposed to ask people what the different, like what does nobility mean? Or what is a habitual drunkard? And so I'll show you how I teach my students strategies if that happens. Now, in all my years of teaching, I've mostly had a student be asked one vocabulary word. What is a weapon? So for some reason, when students come back after they've passed, they'll say, well, they asked me about a weapon. That's the only thing they asked me about. So I teach that word. I give examples of that over and over. And a few have been asked, like, what is a habitual drunkard? But my understanding is that they should not ask them what the vocabulary words mean. So I'll show you how I teach students. So in person, I have an N400 dictionary that I made. And so I took the question and took claim. No, students have no idea what that means. So to claim is to say something is true. I give them a real world example. Like, did you say on a job eligibility form that you are a citizen? Okay, if you did that, then you claim to be a US citizen. And so have you ever claimed to be a US citizen? No. This is the first question that you're asked. So this one we study all the time. So then they know, okay, now I'm in the yes, no questions. Now we've started there. And then another one that's important is, have you ever been arrested, cited, or detained by any law enforcement officer for any reason? So they hear arrested and they say, no, I've never been arrested. But they don't understand cited. So cited is a ticket. And I explain, if you had a speeding ticket, you answer yes. You say, I had a speeding ticket in 2019 and I paid the fine. So I'll show you here kind of, well, here I have the sentence frames right here. Yes, I had a speeding ticket and I paid the fine. Or a lot of students have parking tickets. Now, again, these are very minor. They don't need any paperwork to show, but I always just say it's important to tell the truth, and they know everything. They can see your driving record. And so if you've had any tickets, you want to be able to explain that at your interview. And then I also go over the oath questions about, do you support the Constitution and form of government of the United States? Support means believe in. Constitution is the laws. Now, again, they only answer yes, but I give them a sentence answer to help them understand. Yes, I believe in the laws of this country. To bear arms, again, I told you about a student who said no. And so if you hear if the law requires it, requires means you must do it. To bear arms, I teach them, means to become a soldier. Yes, I will become a soldier for the United States if needed. But I explain about the selective service and that it's usually men between 18 and 26, and we haven't had a draft since the Vietnam War, and it's very unlikely, but you do promise that you will bear arms if needed. So I try to go over these questions multiple times with students because they don't know what bears arms means. And so teaching them that arms is another word for guns. And so what they're asking you on behalf of the United States, they're asking if you will do it for the United States government in the military. So then I read these cards. These are the full, look at how long these questions are. So I read these to students in class and then I give them a card. I say, don't say anything. So just hold up your card if the answer is yes or no. And I mix them up. So I make it even more difficult. My goal is that students go to their interview and they say, huh, Jessica, that was so easy, which is usually what happens because I've taught them all these yes, no questions and I've mixed them up and usually they go in order. So first it's going to be all the no's and then it's going to be the 6 oath questions. But I want them to be so familiar with them that I mix them up and have them hold up a card and then ask a student to, okay, what is a weapon? Or what is a terrorist? And then have them try to verbalize what that means. Online, again, I'm just doing one question at a time and explaining that claim is to say something is true. Okay, I've had a couple students some of students are having interviews in person and some of them are having them online. So they go, I don't know if this is still happening, but they'll go to the office in Minneapolis and then they'll talk to someone in Texas. And I heard a couple stories of people being asked, well, have you ever claimed to be a US citizen? No. Then the officer said, why not? And then the student thought they got it wrong. Then they got confused. Then they didn't pass. So I teach my students this over and over. Why not? Because I'm not a US citizen. And the same with voting. Have you ever registered to vote? Have you ever voted? showing them pictures of the Minnesota voter registration application and a ballot to explain the difference between registered to vote and voting. Why not? Because I'm not a US citizen. Now, again, these are only a couple stories that I've heard, but whenever I hear stories like that, I try to make sure that my students are comfortable to answer these questions if they're asked. Because I think if the immigration officer gives them questions they're not ready for, they get confused, they think they got it wrong. And so now my students can just say, because I'm not a US citizen, they just can say it very easily because we just keep practicing. Again, this is one that we talk about. Now, you don't need to understand all these words, but you hear the word weapon, okay? Were you ever part of a group that used a weapon, okay? Now these are what I tell them, these are your two options. So what is a weapon? If you know, you answer it if they ask you. Now, again, it's very unlikely that they're going to ask you. But if they do ask you, they ask you this question, you say no, then they say, well, what is a weapon? So it's a gun, it's a bomb, it's a knife. And so now all my students can answer that. Now, if they get a vocabulary word like genocide that they don't know, they can say this. Can I speak with a supervisor, please? And then the immigration officer takes them to the supervisor and they have to explain what happened. The officer asked me, what is a weapon? There is a rule, they can't ask me what a word means. So I do say to my students, if you know the answer, just answer it and move on with the interview. If you don't know the answer and you think you will fail, then ask for the supervisor. So I've been giving my students this advice for about 3 years after we heard it from USCIS. None of my students have had to ask for a supervisor. None of my students have been asked about the vocabulary. So I just tell students, we're going to practice this in class because I want you to know your rights, and USCIS needs to make the interviews fair. So they need to ask the same questions of all the people being interviewed. And if they start asking you about the vocabulary, what's an insurgent organization, and you don't know how to explain it, and you're worried you're going to fail, you ask for a supervisor. Now, again, I haven't had any students need to do that. I have had students be asked one word, like what is a weapon? What is a habitual drunkard? But those are about it that they've actually been asked about in all my years of teaching citizenship. So I'm not sure, I know in different parts of the country, maybe you're seeing different things. But the lawyer here told me that they should not ask what vocabulary words mean. And if they do, they ask for a supervisor. So then there's the oath questions. So do you understand the full oath of allegiance to the United States? So I show them the oath of allegiance, and I have pictures from ceremonies that I went to. And I explain that this is what you say the day that you become a US citizen. I also show them how this oath of allegiance has these words that they also see on their application about bearing arms, about the Constitution. So in here are those promises that you're making to the United States. I teach my students what is the oath of allegiance. I think maybe 2 students in all my years have been asked, what is the oath of allegiance? Usually they're just asked, do you understand the full oath of allegiance to the United States? And they respond, yes. Then they go to the next question. But I teach them oath of allegiance means, oath means promise. Allegiance means loyalty. So it's a promise of loyalty to the United States. So you're promising that this is your country and you will help the United States. If the law requires it, are you willing to perform non-combatant services in the U.S. Armed Forces? Okay, what does non-combatant mean? Non-combatant means not fighting. So sometimes I'll talk about combat. Combat means fighting. So non-combatant means not fighting. And so what you're actually saying is, yes, I will help the military if needed. I will be an interpreter. I will be a cook. I will put data in the computer. I give them examples of what it means to be non-combatant services. So then I have a couple activities that I've made on WordWall to practice this vocabulary. So again, I have sets of 7 videos, and you have access to these videos on my Citizenship website. And then after students watch the video, then during class, we'll say, okay, what is a weapon? And then I'll call on different students to choose the right answer. Now, again, this vocabulary is very difficult. What is the military? Okay, soldiers or armed forces. So just another way to practice that key vocabulary. What is an armed force? It's a group of people with weapons. So I'm just taking some of that key vocabulary. Combat. Combat means fighting. Because there'll be a question about, have you ever recruited anyone under the age of 15 for combat? So that is one way that we review the vocabulary. The nice thing is these WordWall activities, they can do them over and over and over. So there's no limit to how many times they can practice.
Oh, Jessica, we can't see the activity. Sorry to interrupt you.
So neither one worked? Shoot. So you didn't see that?
No.
Okay, I'm sharing my screen. Now, do you see it?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that. So here's what I was talking about with the word wall. What is an armed force or group? What does combat mean? Fighting. What does training mean? Lessons or school. So they just select those. And then here are some yes/no questions. So just another way online to put these yes/no questions together, mix them up, and then have students read them to each other and talk about what the question means. So there's different sets of these conversation wheels also with the yes/no questions. And then I also try to focus on, you see this, right, Megan? Mindfulness.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I also try to teach students like relaxation techniques because they're very, very nervous for their interview. And so we talk about mindfulness. And so in class, we'll talk about, okay, in your home, wherever you are, think about 3 things that you see. Okay, so you're focusing on your current environment. 3 things you see, 2 things you feel, 2 things you hear, 1 thing you smell, 1 thing you taste. And so just a way to bring them to the present moment. I also talk about breathing, holding your breath, breathing out like 4 square breathing. We talk about, what helps you relax. For some people, it's prayer. For some people, it's meditation. I also say, make sure you go early to your interview. You do not want to get stuck in traffic and get really nervous. So go early so you can park and sit and be mindful or relax or whatever will help you. Now on to reading. So again, it depends on their literacy level. Some students need no help with reading, others need a lot of help. And I do encourage students who are beginning level to go to ESL classes, go to English classes, because I can't teach you to read and write in my citizenship class. And so it's best if you're practicing 4 days a week or 2 days a week in a school where you're working more on learning to read and write. But I do have slides just starting with the question words. So just reading these, I have them on cards and mixing them up and so these are hard for beginning level ESL students to read, especially if they don't have literacy skills in their home language. So we have a lot of people in Minnesota who have not had a lot of prior education. And so just focusing on reading and recognizing these question words. And then for someone who's low literacy, just 1 word at a time, just read the slide. And I do this in class too, because I can project this and have students just read it, then put them together. So I have slides with just the one word at a time. And then for higher level students, it's just going through and reading, I say like, read 5 slides to me, and who lives in the White House? And I was like, okay, you passed. All you have to do is be able to read one of those correctly. And so it depends on their language level. Some students, like I said, don't need any reading practice, but at least I show them what questions they might need to read. And then other students, it's starting with the question words and one word at a time. And those keywords like president and Congress. So for writing practice, this is in the Google Doc. This is the official list from USCIS. So I show students, these are the words that are most important. So Washington, Congress, United States. If you can't spell Lincoln, it's okay. It's only in one sentence. So if you spell that wrong, they will give you another sentence. There are many sentences with Washington and president. So you have to know how to spell those before you go to your interview. Independence Day, there's only one sentence with Independence Day. So if that's too difficult for you, just focus on these keywords first, and then we'll add more. So this is the list from Lynn Weintraub's book, and it's she took all the words that USCIS told us about and put them into sentences. And then, if I have a student that has an interview in a couple of weeks, we're going to focus on these ones that are bold, because these have some of the high frequency words. And for the rest of the students, we'll do 5 sentences every week. And I make sure every week there is a sentence with president or Washington in it, because you can see they're in so many of the sentences. In person, I do a walking dictation. So I have these sentences typed up on large paper, and one student goes out and memorizes the sentence and comes in and dictates it to their classmate who writes it down. So each group does 5 sentences. So I put them on different colors. So like one group of sentences will be on white paper and another group will be on blue paper. So Fardosa, you read the white sentences to Hind, and then Hind, you read the blue sentences to Fardosa. And that works really well. Again, they're up and moving. On Zoom, you can use the whiteboard if a student knows how to use a whiteboard. So I dictate the sentences to them, and then we can correct them together. Because on Zoom, you can annotate, you can write over, right on the screen as well. So this was a student writing about the flag. And then I also have them, I dictate sentences and write, and then they send a picture to me. And then I can look at it and give them any corrections. A lot of my students will also just write it in the chat, and that works as well. So when I dictate the sentences, sometimes they just write in the chat or they write on paper. So students who need more writing practice, just practice one word at a time instead of sentences. And there's a couple of videos on my website where I just do one word practice. Focus on those high frequency words. And the content words are the most important. So if they write, Washington was first president, that's fine. It doesn't matter that they forgot the. So the is not important, or that's not as important as those content words, because you have to understand what the sentence means. So really focusing on Congress. Congress meets in Washington, D.C. If they write Congress meets Washington, D.C., they're fine. In is not so important. So for lower level students, I give them, each one of these lines is for a letter. And I break it down by syllables. So president. So in person, I have papers like this, and then online, they just write it in their notebook. So president. Washington. So just for the students that need you to break up the words into syllables. And then we'd put them together in a sentence. So I take specific words, break them up by letters and syllables, and then put them together in a sentence. All right, because of time, I'm going to go a little quickly through this, but again, you have access to all of this information. So I have partner interviews where I have some of the personal information questions, and then I have the civics questions here. So one student has the paper, the other student doesn't have the paper. One student asks the questions, they answer, then they switch and give a new paper. And I have the students mark it. So if they don't get it right, put an X here so they know what they need to study. So it's also individual feedback for them. So they can see, they need to study number 61, but they're fine with 69 and 8. They got yes. So they give feedback to each other. Online, I've put these partner interviews into a Google Doc. So I share the Google Doc, get the link, and then I put the link in the chat. Or I also use a message program called Remind. And so I send them the link in Remind, so then they get a text message on their phone, and then they can read the questions on their phone and use Zoom on their computer. It's a little hard for students who are just on a phone, but they can still stay on Zoom and get the Google Doc. And then I create breakout rooms and assign different students to the breakout rooms, and then they can practice with their partners. So one person asks, the other answers. So it was just a way to help them get to do more communication in class, in the online class. So lastly, I'll show you my citizenship website. Okay, Megan, can you see this? Do you see citizenship?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Now I'm worried it's not transferring. So again, this I made in early 2020, and this is available to all of you to give to your students. And so there's writing practice, and there's 7 videos where a student can click here, and I'll read sentences, and then I'll show them the answers. There's also the one-word writing for lower level students. So in these videos, they will practice all of the sentences. I think there's 36 sentences. Then we have 100 questions. Here I ask the question and then show the answer. That gives students time to answer on their own. I also have one that's all the questions except for politicians. So this is all the 100 questions, and this one has the politicians because this is the one that might need to get updated. Then I have all these yes/no videos. So all the yes/no questions, the 6 oath questions, personal information questions. So again, talking about marital status, spouse, all those questions they'll be asked. And then the N400 vocabulary, legal, current. So those are all available as videos. And then you already saw the word wall. And then I also have reading practice where I show a question and then I read it afterwards. So just so you know, it'll link you to a YouTube video or a Loom video where I explain the vocabulary. All right, and then there's a great website that Lynn Weintraub has where you can sign up for updates, and she doesn't send a lot, so that's helpful. It's not like you're overloaded with emails, but she will send emails about changes to the USCIS, changes to the civics questions or changes to the application. So that is helpful. You just go to her website and that's here in the, you'll get the links tomorrow. We have a Citizenship ESL instructional support kit on our website. So you just type in your information and then you can download it. Then you'll get our practice interview with all the questions. It also has some practice with that talking to a supervisor practice, the oath questions, the reading list, the writing list, and then there's also flashcards in there. And again, all you need to do is go to our website, put in your name and information, and then you can download the information. I will take a look and